Welcome back, everyone. This is the 9th in a series of tips from the In the Field section of my new book, The AMC Guide to Outdoor Digital Photography. And today I'm going to be talking about filters, which are basically little pieces of glass or resin that you put in front of your lens that change the quality or properties of the light hitting your sensor. And there's three types of filters I typically use on a regular basis. So if I were going to pick one filter to purchase, it would be a polarizing filter. This is a polarizer here, and basically polarizers are traditionally used to darken blue skies, help make those clouds pop, adding contrast to your sky. But that's not why I like to use them. I like to use them primarily in forest scenes, waterfall scenes, stream scenes to reduce reflections and glare on water and foliage. Whenever you have waxy leaves or wet leaves, or you have a stream, you have some reflection of the white and blue sky that's up above. And what that does, it reduces the amount of the true color of the stream bed or the plants from coming through and reaching your sensor. And by using a polarizer, which twists, you got to turn it to get the polarizing effect. You reduce those reflections, reduce that glare, and really saturate the colors so it looks more like you expect it to look in your photos. So whenever you're in the woods or shooting a waterfall shot or a stream shot, I really recommend using a polarizer. The only downside of these is it reduces the amount of light coming to your sensor by about 2 stops, so you have to use slower shutter speeds. But like I talked about last week when talking about motion, a lot of the times when you're shooting waterfalls or streams, rivers, things like that, having a slower shutter speed is actually a good thing to add a little blur to the shot. Which brings me to the second filter I like to use, a variable neutral density filter. And I talked about this a little last week in regards to slowing down exposures so you can blur moving subject matter. And basically a neutral density filter reduces the amount of light that comes back to hit your sensor, so you're forced to use slower shutter speeds. And what a variable neutral density filter does is it lets you vary how much light is prevented from reaching the sensor. So you can buy, a 2-stop, 3-stop, 8-stop neutral density filter, or you could buy a variable filter that lets you dial in your exposure basically. This one goes from about 2 stops to 8 stops. This is a Stingray variable neutral density filter. So the advantage of this is whenever you need to slow down your shutter speed to blur your subject matter, this is when you want to use this filter. It's really quite easy to use and quite handy whenever you want that silky waterfall look, or you want to blur action in sports or adventure shots on a bright sunny day and you can't quite get it at slow enough shutter speed. That's when you'd use one of these. Now the third filter I like to use on a regular basis is a graduated split neutral density filter. And what this filter does is in big landscape scenes like this, when you might have a dark foreground and a bright background, it lets you put this in front of the lens and darken that sky, that background, while keeping your foreground brighter. So you can balance that exposure. Whenever you have, maybe 4 or 5 stops difference in exposure between your foreground and your sky, using a split neutral density filter will really help balance that exposure. Now these come in various strengths and styles. This is a 3-stop filter with a soft edge, so it's a real gradual change from the 3 stops up top to clear on the bottom. You can get a hard edge. You can also get 2 stops or 1 stop, and I think even a 4-stop filter if you want. The key to using one of these is getting this demarcation line between the top of the filter and the bottom of the filter lined up with the horizon or wherever that change in light is in your photograph. And I'll typically put my camera in depth of field preview mode at f11 or f16 and move this up and down while viewing the scene through the lens that way to line this up more properly. It's harder to see without using that depth of field preview. So that's the best way to sort of figure that out with one of these filters. Okay, so that's this week's tip. I love to use a polarizer, the variable neutral density filter, and the graduated split neutral density filter. If you haven't used any of these before, I recommend borrowing them from a friend and trying them out. I think you'll find they are nice tools to add to your camera bag. For more tips and to learn about my book, The AMC Guide to Outdoor Digital Photography, visit monkmanphoto.com.